Module 2, Basics of Policy Analysis. So this is our model for the health policy process. From here we need to think about how policy is then created, uh, from first identifying the problem, to identifying solutions, identifying how to implement it, and then identifying to what extent the policy was successful or not, and also dealing with the larger social, economic, political, and historical forces may influence this process. So using this, we need to start thinking about how do we use this, or what kind of questions do we need to answer as we start to develop a health policy. So when creating or thinking about creating a new policy, we need to think about some different aspects of the issue. Probably the first being, what is the problem? And in regards to working with many different stakeholders, that may not be very straightforward. So different groups may have different issues that they want to be addressed. Related to that, what are the factors that relate to the problem? And that may also become an important aspect that needs to be addressed as part of this process. What is the target population? Will this policy impact society as a whole, a specific community, large, small? That may be a factor. What are the consequences of the problem? Can we live with the problem itself, or is this problem big enough that it needs to be addressed? What is particular ideology, and in talking about ideology, we're talking about set of beliefs um, in regards to what needs to be done. Okay, and related to that is when you're trying to identify the goals of the policy, there are certain ideology or certain beliefs may play a role in identifying that. And again, amongst all that, there will be people that will gain something from the policy and those who will lose something. And it also becomes part of the process. So when thinking about this, we can think about it as example being the Affordable Care Act. What was the problem? A lot of people did not have health care. And so what was the cause of that? A lot of people didn't have health insurance. And so we're looking at a population of people without health insurance. What were the consequences of the problem? The cost of healthcare for the rest of society were skyrocketing because of all the money that was going to help those without health insurance. At the same time, you're seeing a large number of health disparities among many populations because they had inadequate access to health care. And so we then start looking at some of the ideology around this. Many individuals wanted to initiate a single payer program within the United States. But within the United States, that idea was not very popular politically. And so we went to the idea of subsidizing the purchase of private health insurance. And so the goals for the Affordable Care Act was to improve people's ability to purchase health insurance as opposed to making sure individuals have basically have access to the healthcare itself. So from this, who gained, who lost? Health insurance company gained quite a bit. In terms of political parties, as we'll look at that in more detail, certain political parties gained influence, others lost influence, and it continued to be an issue that's really still under discussion at this point in time. Now, when we're talking about the creation of the policy, we can think about the type of person that's involved in this process, and that's the policy analyst. This is the person that uses a particular knowledge base in order to make some of those decisions or make some of those suggestions in the creation of a particular policy. From there, we can look at individuals coming from a wide range of disciplines, from economics, political science, public health, and so forth. that is used to, again, address the issue, help identify the problem, help identify the solutions, and then examine the implementation of such. And so, in doing this, the project policy analyst works as a member of a larger team towards his goal. Again, of trying to build and trying to initiate any kind of policy goal. Now, as we've talked about, the role of evidence in developing health policy and the certain level of research skills needed for a policy analyst, those are not the only skills needed by them. And so we can start talking about the other kinds of skills, or the soft skill base that a policy analyst needs as part of their job. Some of the other activities, they need to work with many stakeholders, many other decision makers and staff, people within the community, people, their colleagues, and so forth. They need to be able to work with them towards a particular goal. In doing so, they need to be able to effectively communicate with them, orally, writing, any number of ways, with a wide range of individuals. So, a policy analyst is a person that's not likely to just have to be focused on the research and to speak with other researchers. They will need to be able to talk about their research to people in the community, to politicians, to employers, all in a way that makes their information much more understandable. And so being able to communicate that science is also becomes very important. And so in doing so, it makes the process work more effectively. Now these days, it's not just universities or governments that are involved in policy development. These days, an important group is what's referred to as a think tank or policy institute. Now, these are specific organizations that are pretty much designed to identify what the problem is and to identify solutions to the problem and to influence the process of creating and implementing health policy. And so there are a wide range of different institutes out there, many of which have their own set of interests and also their own set of biases as part of the process. And so you see many policy analysts may not be working specifically within a university, but maybe working within such as these institutes. Now here are three examples of policy institutes that work on health issues. RAND, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the Kaiser Family Foundation. They all do research. They all publish in research journals. They also publish in media, newspapers, magazines. They talk on news shows. So they're very much focused on providing society with information about a particular problem, particular health problem, and to help identify particular solutions, policy solutions for a particular problem. Now, all three of these are what's referred to as nonprofit organizations. What's meant by nonprofit is that their organization is designed primarily for education and educating society. They're not designed to sell the information to the highest bidder, and so as such, they're given certain breaks in regards to their taxes. That's the number that you see next to each name, 501c3, that identify the kind of nonprofit they are. A 501c3 organization, by definition, are not allowed to directly lobby for or against a specific legislation. They can help educate and perhaps advise politicians and community members, but they cannot take an active role in that activity. On the other hand, though, what's beneficial for being a 501c3 if people donate money to these organizations, individuals can donate the full amount of their donation from their taxes. So it encourages individuals and groups to donate money to these institutes to help support their work. So that's uh, so that's the plus side of being a 501c3. On the one hand, they are kind of limited in the kind of political activity they can do, but on the other hand, they're much more able to get the resources they need, economic resources they need to do the work that they want to do. Now, the previous example we looked at are examples of institutes that are not generally known to having a particular ideological or political bias. These next two institutes are actually do have a particular bias in regard to the kind of work they do. The Heritage Foundation is primarily focused to dealing with conservative public policies, whereas the Center for American Progress are much more focused on liberal or progressive issues. Um, and what's different between these organizations and the other ones is that there's actually two different aspects to them. There's actually the 501c3 aspect, the typical nonprofit, as the other ones that do the research, that do the education, and they're able to support that. But when it comes to lobbying, there's actually a separate organization that actually uses information that's collected from the 501c3 portion, and then actually use it for active lobbying, and that's the 501c4. So the 501c4 nonprofit are much freer in doing the kind of political work in influencing the policy process that the 501c3s are unable to do. At the same time, they're unable to, those who donate to those causes aren't able to get the full deduction. So there is a drawback in that regard. And so you see many of these kinds of institutions that have, again, they take uh, the one arm that does the information collection and then the other arm that does the active lobbying. So with the Heritage Foundation, that's the Policy Institute that does the policy work, and then the Heritage Action for America, they're the ones that have the direct connections with politics, politicians, and others to influence the implementation of specific policy goals. At the same time, you have the Center for American Progress. Again, they're doing the work in collecting information and the research in regards to progressive and liberal goals. And at that same time, you have the Center for American Progress Action Fund. And this is the organization, again, that does the specific political work to implement those specific liberal progressive policy goals. And just a note, the current president for the American Progress Action Fund is Ted Strickland, who you may or may not remember was a former governor here in Ohio, and who may be running for Senate, federal Senate, in the next year or so. Now, regardless of the particular emphasis or particular bias, policy institutes and policy analysts are involved in two basic activities. One, conducting the research, investigating the issues, and identifying possible solutions. Related to that is then they need to be able to communicate that research again, in a manner that is understandable and usable by others. That is probably the other single important goal when we're looking at the policy process, is that being able to communicate. And so if you recall examples, Sunday morning, for example, many news shows have people from various policy institutes talking about a particular issue. Um, and this actually makes a great distinction between many academic researchers and those who work within these policy institutes. Many academic researchers may not have that kind of connection or desire to have that kind of connection to communicate to a larger audience. They're much more focused on working with their colleagues, working with a particular discipline, and communicating that way through peer-reviewed research. Many policy analysts and policy institutes, while they may be involved in that kind of activity, are also involved in trying to communicate their ideas much more broadly. An example of which actually we'll see in the next slide. Alright, you could click the link that's up here where it says Meet the Press. I'll take you directly to a short little video from the TV show Meet the Press that has a discussion about the Affordable Care Act from three people. We have Dr. Toby Cosgrove from the Cleveland Clinic, Neera Tandon from the Center for American Progress, and also Avik Roy, who's part of the Manhattan Institute, which is again much more of a conservative policy institute. Again, they're all talking about the same thing, about the Affordable Care Act, but take a listen to in terms of distinction between how the three individuals speak about. You'll get an idea about a particular different set of interests, different set of biases that go into the discussion. But again, all about the same issue.